Hello and welcome to Adelante Chicago. I'm Ana Belaval in for Lourdes Duarte. Thank you so much for joining us today. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Joining me now are Darcy Flynn, Midwest Regional Manager for Heartland Alliance, and Dr. Joel Fillmore, formerly trafficked survivor, but also a licensed clinical professional counselor at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
So, Darcy, I wanted to start with you because I don't know, I often wonder if people realize how pervasive human sex trafficking is in the United States. I often think that they're under the impression that that's a problem from another country, that doesn't happen here. What would you tell them?
Absolutely. So human trafficking is happening everywhere in other countries, but as well as our own country, to our own people, U.S. citizens, as well as foreign nationals trafficked into this country where the trafficking actually takes place on our own soil.
And where is there a community that's specifically targeted? Does it happen more in a certain community?
It happens to anyone. Human trafficking can happen to anyone. It can happen to males, females, adults, minors, LGBTQ community, foreign-born U.S. citizens. We don't see it happening necessarily in one community and not the others. No community is exempt.
Dr. Fillmore, for those who don't really understand it, Darcy says human trafficking. Some people say human sex trafficking. What kind of enslavement is this? What are we talking about?
Well, this is modern day slavery in effect, and you know, I want to point out that it is in fact disproportionately happens in minority communities, the Latino and the African American and the Asian community. It's actually more disproportionately happening in those communities in terms of the trafficking. And you know, in the academic field, we call it domestic trafficking.
Okay.
Because it happens here in the United States.
In between states?
It's not so much, you know, going off to, you know, some other country and bringing people here. That happens,
right.
But domestic trafficking is really a huge, huge issue here in the United States, where these are United States citizens, children, men and women, as Darcy said, who are being victimized.
Why most often among minorities?
Well, I would say it's a couple of things. I think one of it has to do with socioeconomics. I think it has to do with accessibility, and I think part of it also has to do with just kind of the way that the systems of oppression are set up. In our country, it's easier to be dismissive of certain populations of people because maybe we don't see them as quite as deserving, and so it becomes a challenge. If you think about the way that laws are enacted in the United States, most often laws are changed or created because they impact a certain population of people. There's a saying that says laws don't change unless they impact a significant number of people or a number of significant people.
Right.
So what we're saying is we don't think these people are significant, therefore we don't change laws.
Because in Illinois, we're talking of hundreds of thousands of victims. How do you create awareness, Darcy?
So at Heartland Alliance, we only work with foreign nationals because of the funding that we get. But to raise awareness, we're training everyone, because everyone from doctors, attorneys, law enforcement, your average citizen, right? Churches, everyone needs to know about this issue because it's happening in their communities. So we raise awareness and we teach them what signs to look for so that when they're out in the community or serving populations through their work, they can look for the red flags.
What are those red flags?
Yeah, so I think for trafficking, you're going to look at the vulnerable populations, especially for sex trafficking, for example, in the medical field, right? If you have someone entering a hospital, you're going to look for red flags such as malnutrition or addicted to drugs or STDs, pregnancy. There are a whole list of things that if you see repeat in their medical file, you can kind of think, red flag.
Got it.
And that's just a medical example.
Got it. Dr. Fillmore, I know it is a very personal story for you, but if you could share your experience, your personal experience.
Absolutely. You know, I really appreciate the fact that Darcy touched on the fact that this happens just as much within the LGBT community as well as the general population, because it's pretty prolific in the LGBT community. Myself, I was a victim of sex trafficking when I was in my early 20s. And so, and I lived that lifestyle for 10 years, 4 years of which I was under the, under the thumb of a pimp. And so, after getting away from him, after 4 years of being under him, I was a victim of sex trafficking. I'd been addicted to crack cocaine and heroin, and it's all I knew. And so after I left him and was able to get away, my pimp was in fact my addiction for the next 6 years. And it wasn't until I ended up going to prison and getting clean that I really made a kind of this paradigm shift. And it was through that paradigm shift I was able to kind of look at myself and say, hey, what do I want for my life? What, you know, and how can I make things different? I knew first and foremost I had to get educated, because with my background, there was literally nothing I could do. And I mean, what reason did anyone have to believe that I was a person who had changed? And so I spent the next 10 years going to college and getting my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate. And I specifically wanted to make sure that the work that I did, that I worked with victims of sex trafficking in disenfranchised populations. So I do work in trafficking, trauma, specifically in trauma, related to abuse and victimization, as well as substance abuse. So.
That's interesting. You and I were talking about the Illinois laws, and you say that Illinois and Ohio are two states that are in the forefront of having the good laws to protect the victims. What are those laws like? Why are we different?
Well, I think one of the things is we have some really powerful people in the state of Illinois who are like, they're warriors for change when it comes to fighting for the rights of the disenfranchised. The Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation is an amazing organization here in the city of Chicago, and the work that they do, they really work on the policy and the legal side of everything, and through the work that they have been doing over the years, they were able to get a law enacted called the Justice for Victims of Sex Trafficking Act. And what that law says is that if anyone can prove that they were victims of sex trafficking and they committed crimes, well, then the law has the right, the judge has the right to then go back and vacate all of those offenses. Because oftentimes when you're a victim of sex trafficking, you're not just getting arrested for prostitution and soliciting, you're getting arrested probably for theft and loitering and all of these other things that were directly related to the fact that you were a victim.
And that is so liberating when that record is clear. It gives them a second chance at life and at rehabilitation. Thank you so much, Dr. Fillmore and Darcy, for joining us from Heartland Alliance. I want to show this hotline, the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, 888-373-7888. If you need more information or if you need help, reach out. Thank you so much.